Welcome to WHRO's Weekly Edition. I'm Barry Graham in for Doug Boyton. In this week's program, we'll examine the rich history of gay culture in Hampton Roads for Pride Month. The EPA donated around $2 million to a local group to develop messaging about recycling. The long wait is over. Palm reading is finally legal in Norfolk. WHRO's Ryan Murphy sat down with someone who's been doing it since the 50s.
And so I picked it up at a very early age, and I was reading all my classmates by the time we moved here to Norfolk.
And as election season nears, WHRO's Connor Worley shares how the ward-based voting system developed in Norfolk in the 1980s. But first, this news update from NPR News. It's WHRO's Weekly Edition. Hampton City Council approved new rules for short-term rentals last week. WHRO's Nick McNamara reports that they included a favorable change for short-term rental properties.
The short-term rental rules approved by Hampton City Councilors reduced separation requirements recommended by the Planning Commission. Rather than a 500 feet distance between rentals, Hampton will only require a 300 feet separation. Vice Mayor Jimmy Gray.
We noted that 500 feet would really eliminate a number of opportunities for short-term rentals. We want to provide every opportunity for those short-term rentals that were currently operating legally to continue to operate.
Going unchanged was a rule capping permits for rentals to 1% of residences in each of the city's 51 short-term rental zones. The rules go into effect July 1st, with permit enforcement beginning in October. Nick McNamara, WHRO News.
A Virginia Beach parish is raising money for a scholarship in the name of Rachel, an enslaved woman sold by the church in the 1700s. WHRO's Sienna Morales has more.
Parishioners at Old Donation Episcopal Church have been learning about the history of racism in the country. That inspired them to look into their own centuries-old history and take action.
We contributed to some of the problems. We benefited from some of the problems. Therefore, we have a responsibility to trying to make a difference in a positive way.
That's Father Bob Randall. They found the record of Rachel's sale in a vestry book from 1767. The church has now raised $25,000 for an endowed scholarship for local students at Norfolk State University. This Juneteenth, they expect to grow the Rachel Scholarship Fund to $45,000. Sienna Morales, WHRO News.
The Navy announced a new parking garage at Newport News Shipbuilding. WHRO military reporter Steve Walsh says it's part of an effort to improve the quality of life for sailors at the shipyard.
The Navy will spend $120 million to build a parking garage in Newport News. The shipyard came under intense scrutiny after a rash of suicides among sailors on board the USS George Washington. The deaths highlighted the need to improve conditions for sailors assigned to the shipyard, says Rear Admiral Casey Moten.
This action will directly support our sailors. And while there is more work to do, I am confident that we are on the right trajectory.
Sailors complained of long travel times in and out of the shipyard. The garage will create 2,000 new spots less than a half mile from the main gate, which will be split between the Navy and shipyard workers. Without disclosing a plan, the Navy and city officials hinted there was a plan in the works to build additional housing in Newport News. The new garage is set to come online in 2026. Steve Walsh, WHRO News.
It's Pride Month, and amidst the flurry of pride flags and festivities, there exists a historical backdrop of gay culture in Hampton Roads. I reflect on the region's rich culture in this story. For decades, gay life centered in the bars. Most were found in the downtown core of Norfolk. Bill Zimmerman remembers two of the earliest gay-friendly establishments dating back to the 1950s.
One was called Phil's Arena. And next door was Cafe Society. Phil's Arena was for the rough crowd, but next door at Cafe Society, that was frequented by the people who thought themselves just a little bit above that of the average gay person. A lot of fun.
Norfolk's downtown had a rough reputation. Main and Granby streets were filled with bars and burlesque houses. In the late 50s, infamous Mayor Fred Duckworth decided to clean up the city and shut down the bars. That, combined with white flight, created a region that was devoid of any nightlife. Rents were cheap and gay bars began to crop up. One could slip into downtown after dark almost unnoticed. According to Bill Zimmerman, at first, Norfolk's gay bar scene was practically underground.
Back in those days, everything was secretive. It had to be secretive. That's the way the law was at the time. If you were known to be a gay person, you could receive some very, very harsh punishment.
By the 1970s, Norfolk had countless gay-friendly establishments: the Paddock, the Ritz, the Nickelodeon, the Aura House. One bar, the Continental, was tucked away on Tazewell Street between Granby and Bush. Once a nationally known venue for traveling jazz artists, by the late 70s, it had become a male gay bar. In 1978, it was rated by Norfolk Vice for just that, being a gay bar. Despite the police harassment, gay establishments flourished in Hampton Roads. Kathleen Rhodes, Director of Women's and Gender Studies at Old Dominion, says there were a number of bars that catered to women.
In the 70s and 80s, there was this boom in lesbian bars in Norfolk. And at one point, there were 5 simultaneous women's bars. So I love to kind of think about what it might have been like to be somebody in 1977 who could go into this place, hear women's music, and meet other people.
As the decades of harassment have faded and society has become more accepting of gay rights with an almost blending into society, signature gay bars have begun to dwindle, and it isn't just in Hampton Roads. A 2019 study revealed that nationally, there is a 37% drop in gay establishments. Locally, redevelopment of the downtown area was the death knell for many of the gay bars. Bill Zimmerman said it wasn't only a wrecking ball that closed them.
The advent of social media. I recently went into a bar literally in Norfolk recently the other day, walked in, everybody at the bar had their phone out. They were texting each other. And the word was spoken. And I said to myself, what in the world is going on here?
Today, there are only a handful of bona fide gay bars in the region. Mainstream acceptance of the LGBTQ lifestyle, plus social media and dating apps, have some questioning whether there is the need to create these traditional safe spaces for the gay community. When combined with rampant gentrification of the areas that were traditional gay ghettos, there is now a mere remembrance of some of the legendary trailblazing venues for the gay community. For WHRO News, I'm Barry Graham. The Environmental Protection Agency gave nearly $2 million to a regional group that develops messaging about recycling. WHRO's Catherine Hefner has more.
The federal grant comes through a part of the bipartisan infrastructure law meant to expand recycling education and infrastructure. A regional organization called Ask HR Green will use it to boost a campaign called Start Smart, Recycle Right. They represent 17 cities and counties in Hampton Roads, which all have slightly different rules on recycling. That's confusing for residents, especially if they live in one city and work in another. Over the next 3 years, Ask HR Green says it plans to put stickers on blue bins with details of what can be recycled and do neighborhood-level audits of recycling habits. In general, the only things supposed to be recycled locally are paper, bottles, and cans. Catherine Hafner, WHRO News.
Williamsburg committed nearly $90,000 to a group that wants to develop a live performance venue in the city. WHRO's Nick McNamara reports.
Advocates for a live performance venue will use the money to commission a study on the economic feasibility of a venue in Williamsburg. The group includes representatives from the local performing arts community. Advocates also requested $42,000 to explore plans for a fundraising campaign. City staff and council members, though, felt that should be done by a city employee. Here's Councilmember Stacey Kern-Shearer.
I think that there is value in having a development specialist that is also aware of other harmonies, no pun intended, that might come together if somebody is thinking not just of how do we provide for the development and the funding of one project.
Council declined the group's third request for $12,000 for website development. Nick McNamara, WHRO News.
Lawmakers are still sorting out raises for troops next year, including an extra increase for young sailors. WHRO military reporter Steve Walsh has the story.
Both versions of the defense budget include raises for younger troops. The House passed a version with a nearly 20% increase for lower enlisted, many of whom live below the federal poverty line and struggle with debt. The Senate version coming out of committee includes an extra 5.5% increase. Senator Tim Kaine says the Senate version also includes several projects.
Salary is one way to make quality of life better for people, but also things like better housing conditions and availability of affordable childcare is another way to send the signal that we really value the service of these folks.
So far, the Senate proposal includes new dormitories for Joint Base Langley Eustis and expanded childcare centers at Joint Base Little Creek Fort Story and Naval Air Station Oceana. There's also money to revamp the barracks at Oceana. The Senate is expected to vote on the full budget in July before working on a compromise. Steve Walsh, WHRO News.
This is WHRO's Weekly Edition. Remember, for any stories you've missed, you can visit us on the WHRO smartphone app or all social media platforms.
The City Council in Norfolk just legalized palm reading in the city. WHRO's Ryan Murphy sat down with a woman who's been reading palms in Norfolk since the 50s and never knew it was technically illegal.
I'm Samantha Weaver, and I'm a palmist, and I have been doing this for 68 years. You're reading the lines and the molds and the mounds that appear in the hand. People are so surprised and so unbelieving of what is actually in their palm and what's available that you can see. You can see if your man's cheating on you. You can see if a baby's coming. You can see if... Okay, here's the reading room. And your right hand.
Okay.
So you can see that this is your lifeline. Do you see how that is? When it's cut or broke like that, you have a higher chance of wanting to drink, wanting to get into drugs or do any kind of a thing like that, but it doesn't, because you catch it. So here it's not split open, so you're not in that problem now. You're in a mild receive here, meaning you got probably 75% chance now of winning the lottery if you buy one wallet. But the darker, the deeper it gets, the more likely you are. My grandmother was known as the bog witch or the healer woman, conjure woman. And so I picked it up at a very early age. And I was reading all my classmates by the time we moved here to Norfolk. My best friend had a birthday party, and her mother wanted me to read palms, and she gave me $5 in 1958. And so that was my professional outcome, because I got paid for it. It was a lot of money to me as a 7-year-old child. I surely didn't realize it was illegal totally on the thing. It was a shock to me when I heard about that, and I'm glad that they voted that 7-1. I think that a lot of that was naval influence of us having a Navy base that's here, and they didn't want them to be going there and getting ripped off. I can remember downtown Norfolk in the late 50s, early 60s, and there was a lot of women down there that did a lot of things. And one of the things that they did, and the sailors were the ones that they're targeting back at that time, and they would charge an arm and a leg. I know that the ones that were reading downtown at that time were certainly not readers. They were in another line of work. But I'm glad I didn't know they were voting on it. I mean, I would have been sick to my stomach if I'd have known they were going to bring this back up at this particular time. I look at it as a gift from God that maybe we can correct some of the way that people think and get a better reputation for people that are very committed to this. This has been my lifelong thing, and it hurts my feelings when people put me in the category of fraud. Back in the early 50s, some people that would be at the different churches would say, oh, don't go to a fortune teller. And I've been at parties and people will talk despairingly about it. And I've had, when I was in my dating years early on, I remember I would say to a guy, if they were very religious or something like that, they'd like, oh, you're a palm reader, okay, and that was the end of that romance. But when you hit nobody else, who are you going to go to? I think they come to psychics and people like myself that can offer them something out of the ordinary. It's sad to me that you have to come to a stranger and pay a stranger to listen to you, to tell you things that give you hope. That part of it is sad to me. But I think that just like there's doctors, just like there's psychiatrists, just like there's all sorts of people that treat different parts of us, humans, I treat the soul.
Another View with Barbara Ham-Lee celebrated an early Juneteenth last Thursday with storytellers, food trucks in the WHRO parking lot, and the curator of Black History and Culture at the Jamestown-Yorktown Foundation, Harvey Bakari, who explained how the holiday evolved and its significance.
Juneteenth began in 2021 as a national holiday, but it originated in Southeast Texas because during the Civil War, the last state to receive information from General Granger about the Emancipation Proclamation was the state of Texas. But it started there, and what made this a memorable holiday is that the community continued to persist in celebrating it, as opposed to many other celebrations African Americans had. So it went from a local holiday celebrated in the state of Texas, surrounding states of Arkansas, Oklahoma, and Louisiana. And in 2021, it became a national holiday to celebrate the end of chattel slavery. But actually, the end of chattel slavery was 6 months later with the 13th Amendment to the Constitution.
You can hear more of that conversation and our Juneteenth celebration episode of Another View by visiting WHRO.org. Cities across Hampton Roads are debating what to do about their city council voting systems. As part of our two-part feature on ward systems in Hampton Roads, WHRO's Connor Worley examines Norfolk's transition to the ward system in the 1980s.
In August 1983, James Gay in Norfolk's NAACP chapter took a bold step in dismantling a well-entrenched system in Norfolk. The suit claimed it resulted from the result of minimizing and diluting black voting strength in violation of the rights of the plaintiffs. The coalition had its sights set on eradicating the city's at-large voting for city council, and in its place established a ward-based system. They argued it disproportionately represented the white population.
So with an at-large election, the entire city, opposed to being broken down into specific wards or districts, votes on a slate of candidates.
That's Joshua Zinger, an associate professor of political science at ODU.
And imagine, let's say it's an at-large election with a 9-member city council. Everyone in the city casts 9 votes, and the top 9 vote getters are who is represented on the city council.
Norfolk's May 1982 elections failed to yield a second black council member, and by that time, efforts mounted to establish a ward system. Delegate William P. Robinson Jr. was a prominent advocate for the system. He and other leaders thought the only way that a reasonable opportunity can be assured to elect more black candidates to city council was through a ward system. What exactly is a ward system? Here's Zinger.
We divide the city into 9 equally sized wards, and equally sized meaning by population, not by geography. So it doesn't matter how big the geographic space is or small. They're going to be equal in terms of the amount of people we live there. Each ward elects their own member to the city council. Whoever gets the most votes in that ward wins that election. And then your 9 members of the city council is made up of people from those 9 specific wards.
The ward system had its detractors despite its perceived advancement in representation. Joseph Jordan Jr. was a judge, civil rights leader, and in 1968 became the first black person elected to Norfolk City Council since Reconstruction. His nephew Rodney Jordan speaks about the late councilman's position.
Uncle Joseph was opposed to that in part because, in large measure, because he felt that was rewarding the residential segregation and the Jim Crow segregation that he and so many others fought against, as well as acting to continue to divide the city along racial lines.
Another opponent, Delegate William P. Robinson Sr., Robinson Jr.'s father, believed it would be, quote, an admission of ultimate defeat.
One of the things that Uncle Joseph warned against was that with the ward system, it was easier for individuals to meddle in the wards.
The Norfolk NAACP chapter, led by attorney James Gay, filed a federal class action suit against the city, Collins v. City of Norfolk.
You had this linkage of Herb Collins and James Gay and Wes Swindell and others who were arguing around representation, that based upon the population of the city, that there should be 3 blacks.
The black population was 35% of the city's total at the time of the lawsuit, and only 2 of the 7 council members were black. In July 1984, not long after he said ward systems would create racial quotas, U.S. District Judge J. Calvert Clark Jr. ruled that the at-large system did not discriminate against black Norfolkians. A large issue the ward systems represented for Joseph Jordan was representation in numbers versus actionable political power. Here's Rodney Jordan.
But if you really want to have influence and power, then influence and power comes when people need to come to you to get elected, and they need to come to you to get reelected. And that by segregating through the race-based ward system, you may gain one position in representation, but you cede power and influence in doing so.
The NAACP appealed the decision, but in July 1985, the court upheld the ruling. A few months later, the Fourth Circuit refused to hear the case a second time. Within a few days, the suit's proponents responded by appealing to the Supreme Court. The court ruled that the 3 judges who upheld Norfolk's at-large voting system would rehear the case. After several months of deliberation, the appeals court sent suit back to the U.S. District Court for a second look. They ruled that Judge Calvert Jr. had erred in his initial decision. In August 1989, the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals ruled 2-1 that Norfolk's at-large voting system denied black voters equal opportunity to elect preferred candidates. By October 1990, the ward system was fully implemented. The Department of Justice approved it in 1991. Here's Zinger on Norfolk's updated system.
Norfolk has 2 super wards, meaning half the city. There's an at-large election for one half of the city and an at-large election for the other half of the city, in addition to the specific wards. So it's a hybrid system.
The 1992 election was the first under the new system, and its impact was immediate. A 3rd black candidate was elected to the council proportional to the number of black residents in the city. In July 1993, the Virginian Pilot ran a story asking people their thoughts a year into the new system. The answer? More than a passing grade. City officials and everyday residents were applauding the change. Connor Worley, WHRO News.
Come back next week to hear the second part in our ward system series. You've been listening to WHRO's Weekly Edition. We had help today from Ryan Murphy, Steve Walsh, Catherine Hefner, Sienna Morales, and Nick McNamara. Also, Connor Worley, who produced today's show. A reminder that you can always catch full episodes on the Weekly Edition podcast feed. You can get your news updates at WHRO.org and the WHRO Reports podcast feed. For all of us at WHRO and WHRV, I'm Barry Graham.